welcome back to the Bullpen Podcast, where we spotlight local business leaders who are making a real impact in their industries. Today, we're joined by Cody Blades, the founder of Blades Law, a Minnesota-based firm focused on helping employees, employers, and business owners navigate complex legal challenges with clarity and confidence. Cody's approach is all about empowerment, helping her clients take back control and move forward when legal disputes threaten to slow them down. We're diving into her journey as a business owner, her insights on employment and business law, and what it takes to build a firm that truly puts clients first. Cody, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Drew. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's jump into the bullpen here. So you founded Blades Law to really build something different. What made you take the leap from working within firms to starting your own practice?
Yeah, I think this has always been sort of the end game. But I didn't always know that. That wasn't always super clear to me throughout my career. My dad was an entrepreneur. He was not a lawyer. He owned his own business. And I remember watching him go through his entrepreneurial journey when I was younger and just thinking like, never, I will never do that. When you have entrepreneurial inclinations, it can be hard to avoid the pull at a certain point. And I really knew that, I had thought about opening my own firm in the past, but it just never felt like the right time. And I also felt a little bit like I owed it to myself and to my family to see whether or not I could make working in another firm work for me and, make a good career out of it and stay somewhere for like 25 years. And, just thought like that would be easier if that could work. But always had this idea in the back of my head that someday maybe I wanted to build my own thing. And I think it clicked to me that that was going to be my next step when the fear of starting the firm was outweighed by my confidence that I could make it successful. And at all previous times, those two had been flopped, right? Like switched. I always felt more afraid than I did confident. And for the first time in my career, I felt more confident than afraid. And so I knew it was time. And my family was like in a stable position. And so it was just like kind of the right time all around.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, obviously, aside from just kind of realizing the right time to go, what's the story behind the decision to focus on employment and business law? Was there kind of a defining moment within past moments in your career that drew you to those areas?
I started my career in strictly plaintiff side employment law, which means employment law on behalf of employees. And I did that for about 3.5 years before I went to other jobs. And I kind of bounced around at other jobs. And so I have actually a really broad practice. I had opportunities later in my career to go back to plaintiff's employment law because, and I really like it. I'm passionate about it, but I really like working with business owners. I really like working with entrepreneurs, and especially those entrepreneurs that maybe don't know a lot of lawyers, don't think the legal system is for them, feel like maybe they aren't part of the class of people that gets to have the benefit of legal counsel to help them grow their business. I really like to be there in that business ownership journey with them. And because of that, I never wanted to go back to strictly plaintiff's employment law because I didn't want to give up working with business owners. And so that's kind of why I have this dual focus. I have an expertise in employment law that can really be used for good when it's on behalf of employees who are really sort of disenfranchised. And then I have this passion for working with business owners and an expertise in working in shareholder disputes too, which is sort of niche. Not a lot of people in Minnesota do it. So those two things combined, and I didn't really want to give up either or. I am working on both. Maybe someday one will fall off and I'll be focused strictly on one practice area. But for right now, I like having a lot of different types of cases to get me through the day. It's fun to have the sort of diversity of cases.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, you touched on the partnership too that you like to have with your clients. And you've talked about rejecting the traditional lawyer-client power dynamic. I mean, how do you make that philosophy a reality in your work with all your clients?
I like to ask my clients what their goals are because, I'm what's called a litigator, which means that I am in the courtroom. I bring lawsuits, I defend lawsuits. So there are some lawyers who don't do that. There are some lawyers who focus on the drafting contracts and things like that. I don't really do that. I focus on when there's a dispute, I come in and help either litigate the dispute or resolve it through settlement. And I think in my area of practice, there are a lot of attorneys who settlement is not maybe the first thing that they think of because they're trial lawyers. And I can do all of that, right? I can litigate a case, I can go to trial. But for me, working with the clients that I've worked with over my career, I've never had a client, I mean, I shouldn't say never, but I very rarely have clients who are like psyched to go to trial or like psyched for this dispute that they're having to drag on for 2 or 3 years. Most of them just want a really efficient solution to the dispute that they're facing and, sort of like a pragmatic solution. And so I pride myself on ensuring that we have a conversation about like, what are your goals? What do you want to get out of this? And then building a strategy around those goals.
Yeah, that's really great. I think just kind of moving into a little bit about just being a business owner yourself and obviously starting your own firm. How has running that firm really influenced the way you help other business owners facing legal challenges and how they kind of approach the process as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because as soon as I went out on my own, the business clients that I still service today sort of had like almost more respect for me. There's this like weird sort of like it's almost like, when you own a Jeep and somebody else owns a Jeep and there's like a head nod. I kind of feel that way about entrepreneurs too. It's like when you own a business and your client owns a business, there's almost like a mutual understanding that like, okay, you get it, you get it, kid. So there's a little bit of that, but I think owning a business makes all of the stakes that my clients have in these disputes more real to me. Like for them, it's not just another dispute. It's not just another day in the office. Like for a lot of my clients, and this is unlike some clients, right? There are some really big companies who face lawsuits often, who are bringing lawsuits often, and they just are sort of more sophisticated. Like as far as the legal system goes, like they know what it means to like defend a lawsuit. For most of my clients, this is like maybe the first or the second time they've ever had to hire a lawyer for their business. And so the whole process can feel very like overwhelming and daunting to them. And I think because I own my own business, I feel it with them, like I get where they're coming from in a way that maybe if I was just working at like, a firm as a lawyer, it wouldn't be as clear.
Got it. Yeah. And I guess kind of going back to some of that discussion that we were talking about earlier on just your experience in both avenues for for businesses and for employees, kind of balancing those perspectives. How does that dual experience help you serve each side better in the end?
Yeah, I think not a lot of people do both sides of the employment coin. So usually you're either representing employers exclusively or you're representing employees exclusively. And sometimes what I've noticed is that can create some blind spots in representation, or it can create, even when it doesn't create blind spots, sometimes it can create like an othering effect where it's like the employer is always the enemy or the employee is always the enemy. There are certain clients who want the lawyer to believe that their employer is the enemy, and or vice versa. The employer wants their lawyer to believe that the employee is the enemy. I'm not the lawyer for them, right? I'm the lawyer for somebody who thinks that thinks that their employer made some bad decisions, but wants ultimately to figure out a way to resolve those bad decisions, or wants to be the employer who makes the right decision, right? Wants the advice that is best for their employees under the law, and maybe just like not even under the law, maybe just ethically. So I think representing both sides gives me a much more pragmatic approach. But then also when somebody really is wronged, when something has happened where like we really do need to bring a lawsuit to make sure that an employer is held accountable, I kind of know the defenses that are coming, and I almost can see behind the curtain because I've been there, and I don't usually advise employers who are doing the wrong thing, but I can see the thought process and kind of where to go, who to talk to, what to look for, what to ask for, in a way that maybe I wouldn't have as clear of an understanding of if I only worked on one side. And let me back up. I think, though, generally what it does is it just gives me a really holistic view of the entire representation. And then also in settlement talks, it gives me a more pragmatic approach than maybe somebody who's never done both sides.
Yeah, and I mean, you touched on it just a little bit ago too, and let's dive into the minutia a little bit of something specific for employees. You talked about anything employees being wronged. I mean, employees who have been wrongfully terminated or are facing workplace retaliation. What are some of the first steps that someone like that should take before calling a lawyer?
I think you'd be surprised too, like you say, before calling a lawyer. Sometimes I think it's maybe good just to even call a lawyer like right away, because sometimes lawyers can be generous with their time. I mean, not every lawyer is going to be generous with their time, but sometimes lawyers will be generous with their time and be like, you know, I'm not going to represent you right now. There's nothing to do yet, but here are some things that I want you to do. Here are some things I want you to think about. So, maybe just call a lawyer and see if you can get some guidance before having to file a suit. But short of that, the biggest thing I can say is make sure you're taking contemporaneous notes, right? And this is for both the employee and the employer. But for the employee, notes that you're taking in the moment when things are happening are more effective and more persuasive than things that you thought of later. So, open up your notes app, have a small notebook with you, write down the date and the time, who said what was said, how you interpreted it, why it was important, and just keep like a really good log of what's going on. Another thing is if you feel like you are being discriminated against or retaliated against, you want to put that in writing. You want to make that report to a supervisor or to HR, because, you want to make sure that somebody there knows that that's the way you're feeling. Because it can make my job easier later. That's usually the first thing I ask is, did you tell anybody? Did you tell, did they have a chance, basically, did the employer have a chance to remedy the situation? Because if they had a chance to remedy the situation and they didn't remedy the situation, that's a better case than if they didn't even know that you had these feelings, or felt like, or were being treated in such a way. So yeah, take notes and then make sure that you're reporting bad behavior when it happens. And that can be really scary, reporting, but know that you have legal protections after you report. If you report and you're treated poorly, you're put on a PIP or you're demoted or God forbid you're fired, there are legal remedies in that case, which sometimes is cold comfort, but hopefully it's comfort to somebody who's in that position.
Yeah. And I think flipping to the business side of things, you already mentioned too that a lot of your clients that you represented, this isn't just another lawsuit or something for them. This is one or two that they've ever experienced. I mean, and a lot of those types of businesses, small, mid-sized businesses, not having in-house counsel. What are some of the biggest employment law mistakes you see some of those companies make, and how can they avoid them before they really happen?
The two biggest, I think, employer side mistakes I see, the first one is bad documentation. So I think most employers know that you should be documenting everything, all the time. And you should even be documenting those things that you think like, oh, not a big deal. Document it, right? Because if you have to make the hard decision to separate somebody from employment, you want to make sure that you have documented the things that support that decision in real time, not after the fact. After the fact is just not as effective. So documentation. That's the biggest thing. Auxiliary to that is making sure you're following your policies. So not every employer that I represent has a handbook or has formal policies. But if you have a handbook, if you have formal policies, you got to make sure they're followed, right? Because you can imagine the first thing that a plaintiff's lawyer does is they ask, well, what is your policy for reporting sexual harassment? Or you don't have one? That's not good. Or you do have one and it wasn't followed here? Also not good, right? So both of those things can be used against you later. So documentation, making sure you're following policy. And then honestly, getting rid of bad people. I don't know why sometimes people will come to me and it's like, why did they keep this guy over that guy when this guy is clearly a problem? That's really hard to do. But if you have multiple complaints against the same guy, or the same girl,
Mhm.
it might be time to start looking for somebody to replace that person's.
Moving on to talking about fractional in-house counsel, one thing that you talked about. What kind of impact do you typically have on a client's day-to-day operations when you step in that type of role?
So fractional in-house counsel can be really varied because it has to do with what the client needs. So for example, fractional in-house counsel could look something like, I am at your headquarters for 5 hours a week, 1 hour every day for 5 hours a week.
Uh-huh.
And, your employees or your sort of like manager level HR people are having regular meetings with me to talk about things like leaves of absences or separations from employment, policy decisions, stuff like that. So it could look as sort of involved as something like that to you call me when you need me, right? And there's a few
Mhm.
people that are allowed to call me. And when those people call me, I answer their questions either on phone or I send out something in writing, depending on what the client needs. And so
Mhm.
fractional can really be sort of molded to what the business needs at the time. And I have an expertise in employment law, so I'm not sure that I would be the right person for a general fractional counsel, but a lot of times, sometimes people will even have like a general counsel or a chief legal officer, but they don't
Mhm.
have somebody who specializes in employment, right? And they just need regular employment help because they have 50 to 100 employees and they're starting to get more and more questions about leave and, whatever. And maybe their chief legal officer doesn't have a specialty in that area or doesn't have time to answer those questions. That's where, a fractional help can be really useful. But like I said, it's really flexible and it really matches whatever the client needs. Like, what are your goals? What are your needs? Okay, how do we build a plan around that to make sure that I'm available to you when you need something?
Got it. Yeah, and kind of moving over into something you touched on a little at the beginning as well, business disputes and the
Hmm.
strategy around that. You also do work with a lot of business owners in what you call business divorces.
Yeah.
What are some of the early warning signs that a partnership might be heading towards some conflict?
Yeah. It's these cases. And the reason I laugh is because these cases are usually messy really quickly, right? But let me think about some real life examples. I mean, I've had things as benign as I'm not getting my K1s. Like I feel like I should be getting my K1s. And then they start to ask questions about, hey, where are my K1s? And turns out like, you know, you're not getting your K1s because we didn't want you to know how profitable the company was and that you
Mm.
should be getting distributions and you're not. That can be a red flag. So just simple things like not having access to the documents you should have access to, asking to see the operating agreement or something like that and not being allowed to see that.
Mhm.
Things like that. I've had clients who are in sort of like 50-50 relationships where they have a 50-50 partnership and,
Mhm.
they're doing all the work and they just feel like they want more equity because they're doing all the work and the other partner is more of like a passive investor and rather than like an active owner. And, you
Mhm.
approach your 50-50 partner about, hey, I'd like to be 70-30. And there's just like total and utter resistance or, you're ignored or whatever. That can lead to a dispute, right? Because how do you solve that? Like if one owner wants 70-30 and the other owner is happy at 50-50, you got to start talking to each other, right? I've also seen where part of your compensation is based on profits and you feel
Mhm.
like the company should be profitable, but because of all the work that you've been doing, yet you're not making any more than you did last year, even though this year is way more busy. It's sort of one of those things where like, it when you see it, it's like things just aren't adding up and you can't seem to get answers to. That's usually when I come in and say, okay, well, here are some ways we can get answers. We can try these different avenues. And
Mhm.
if we have to sue, we can do that. But let's try these other things first. That's where I come in and can build a strategy about how to like get resolution in those scenarios.
Got it. Yeah, and when to kind of work through the discussion to eventually get to litigation is almost a last resort. But you've said that most clients really want an early, efficient resolution. What strategies do you use to help people achieve that without going to court?
Listen, if you have to bring a lawsuit, you have to bring a lawsuit. I love litigating cases. It's sort of my happy place. So like, I'm happy to do that with you if that's what you want. But most people would just rather move on with their lives and feel litigation is a real barrier to doing so. So I like to talk about early resolutions in any form that they can take. And I like to try to really talk with the other side to try to come up with a resolution until we reach a true impasse, which means neither side is going to budge. one side wants something, the other side just isn't willing to give, and there's just not going to be a resolution. Once you've reached that point, sometimes it's time to pull the trigger on a lawsuit, or it's time to wait to see if they sue, right? Depending on the situation. I think that I am a creative problem solver. I tend to think that there's always a way to resolve an issue if both parties are willing to engage in the process of saying what they need and what they want. So I try to just really look at all potential pieces of leverage and figure out, like, what are we willing to give up? What are our non-negotiables? And then what are you willing to give up? What are your non-negotiables? And talk that way. Sometimes we use things like mediations too. Sometimes that can be appropriate. Like a very early stage mediation can be appropriate. It kind of depends on the circumstances of the actual case. And it depends on how much negotiation my client has had with the other side prior to my involvement, right? Sometimes two parties have done everything they can do to reach agreement and just no agreement's going to be reached. And then they come to me. And at that point, probably not worth sending another letter. You guys have already talked it through probably as much as you're going to talk it through.
Yeah, I think that's all really helpful, and especially from a place to make sure people know where they can start. If they're in the middle of something like this, there's just so many different steps that people can take that I think it's helpful to kind of hear, the real life experience from, if I was to hire somebody like this is what would happen, or
Yeah,
what
and
kind of stage of the
that's a really
process I
good
really help
point.
with.
People will not reach out to an attorney because they don't want to sue, or because they don't want to hire a lawyer, because hiring a lawyer means, going to court. And that's not true. Lots of lawyers, including myself, are just really good problem solvers. We're really good at looking at a dispute that's going on from a really removed position. You're in the dispute. It means a lot to you. It's very personal. When you get somebody on board like a lawyer for whom it's not as personal, that can be a little bit more removed, they can look at the problem with fresh eyes from a more neutral place, and then start talking through, well, what could resolution of this look like? Could we do this? Do you think you'd be willing to do this? What if we could do this? Would that be acceptable? And so sometimes it's nice to have a lawyer just to have like a problem solving partner. I don't know how to really put this in percentages, but I bet 50% of my work is more, here's the dispute I'm having, here's the problem, let's figure out how to resolve it, let's figure out how to solve it. And then the other 50% is more like, okay, I think it's time for this to go to court.
Yeah, and for those business leaders that are listening who might not think they need a lawyer until something goes wrong, how can having that proactive legal guidance actually really strengthen their business over time?
Yeah. So I will say I'm not as much of a proactive attorney because I am a litigator. So usually I'm not brought in until there's an actual dispute, which means something's gone wrong. But on the employer side, when an employer is calling me for employment advice, that's usually proactive, right? That's like, okay, how can we make sure that we treat this person right and follow the law and ensure that we make a good decision here? So that's a little bit different. But when you're talking about business owners, usually business owners don't come to me till there's an actual dispute brewing. But I truly think that business owners need to get in touch with my transactional colleagues. And I have a lot of really great transactional connections that I refer to all the time to help do things like get an operating agreement in place, get bylaws in place, get shareholder, like when there's a change to those bylaws or that operating agreement, make sure that there's a resolution written up and in the file. Even having an attorney to do something like keep your corporate book, which is like all of those records, all of those like corporate, meeting minutes and things like that is nice, because then it's all in one place. I refer out a lot to my colleagues who do the sort of like front end prevention work,
Hmm.
because it is so important. And the more money you spend with my colleagues, the less money you spend
Hmm.
with me, right? Sometimes I refer and I say, I hope I never see you again, right? So yeah, I think it's one of those things. What's the phrase? It's like an ounce of prevention is, I don't know. I don't know it. Now I've said it and I don't know it. But it's like the more money and the more care and the more time you spend on the front end to get really good documents in place that make sure that they cover all of your needs and all potential scenarios, thinking about the end, even when you're at the beginning, will save you from ever having to call me.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of the people who do call you and do employer services,
Sure.
what's one client success story that you think really captures the essence of what your firm is all about?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Let me think here. Well, I mean, like I said, I have this specialty. Not a ton of lawyers do it in the Twin Cities, but this business divorce specialty. And where I have seen sort of like without me trying, I end up getting a lot of like women who own businesses, who are in these like sort of partnership deals that kind of go south and need to figure out how to get out of the situation while protecting their equity. Or getting fair value for, the equity that they put in. So I have a lot of examples of women calling me who are 25% owner of their father's business, right? But their dad hasn't been in the business for ages, and they've been the ones doing all the day-to-day work, and they've always been promised more equity, but they never got that equity. And then, I had one client whose dad sold the business out from under her, like unilaterally. She didn't even know. She wasn't even part of the discussions to sell the business. And since he was the majority owner, he could kind of do that. And, we maybe could have fought it, but she wasn't really interested in fighting it. She just wanted to make sure that she got the money that she deserved on wind up. So I get a lot of women who call me who are business owners who are trying to like figure out next steps. And one example is I had a woman call me who was in a 50-50 partnership. She wanted more equity because she was doing all the work in the business. And the other partner, like I said, was more of like a passive advisor. But that passive advisor role had really been like sort of diminished to almost like, like very little involvement. And so that other partner was getting 50% of the profits of this very profitable business without doing very much of the work. And so she approached the other owner and asked if she could increase her equity. The other owner sort of gave her the runaround and didn't directly answer her question. And then she called me because she could kind of see the writing on the wall that like, this other owner is never going to agree to this. Like, we've got to figure out, but I don't want to be partners with this person anymore. How do I separate myself from them? And 50-50 ownership deals are really difficult because there's no majority owner. So you really have to work together to get to a resolution, because it's very difficult to sue in those situations. Honestly, it took us 6 months to work through a deal, and now she owns 100%. But I mean, that was never in court, right? This was all between me and the other partner's owner negotiating for 6 months and getting a deal in place. That's exactly what I want to be doing, is helping people continue to have the equity that they work so hard for, or get the appropriate value for the equity that they work so hard for. And so she's like a great example of that.
Cody, I think we got one more here for you. Looking ahead, what are you most excited about in the future of Blades Law, or I guess in how you see legal services evolving for small businesses and professionals?
Yeah, that's also a good question. I think I'm in the phase of sort of what's next for Blades Law. I didn't know that I would be there so quickly, honestly, Drew. I thought that it would take me a little bit longer to be asking myself that question, but I'm actively asking myself that question. So I guess to that question, I would say stay tuned. I think what I'm really excited for legal services is I'm really excited for AI advancements making legal services less expensive, because right now it is very difficult for even a successful business that's making a lot of money. It's hard for businesses to defend litigation. It's hard for businesses to bring lawsuits and, enforce sort of contractual rights and the like, because it's often just not, as a business proposition, worth it. It's going to be so much more to defend the case or to bring the case than it is to just sort of let it go, like let the money go. And so my hope is that as AI helps lawyers do great work quicker, you collect a lot of documents in litigation, and those documents are housed on, cloud software. And that cloud software is a third-party cloud software, and it's very, very expensive. And so as sort of diving through those documents, as more of that work can be like helped with AI, and as more of lawyers' work can be sort of supported with AI technology, I think it'll be ultimately better for business owners who are right now maybe leaving money on the table because they can't justify paying a lawyer to do a full-on lawsuit or to defend a full-on lawsuit.
Well, yeah, that's some great insight, especially, yeah, a lot of things looking very different in the future, I think, for a lot of industries in the legal industry. certainly included in that. But I think that does it for this show. Cody, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your insights into how law firms can empower, not intimidate their clients. Your story and your approach are great reminders that the legal challenges don't have to stop business owners or professionals from moving forward. For listeners who want to learn more or connect with Cody, visit blades.law or find Blades Law on LinkedIn. But that's all for this episode of the Bullpen Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe and share it with someone who's building something great. Thanks for stopping into the Bullpen. Until next time.
Thanks so much, Drew.